Hello, welcome back to Through the Trapdoor. I'm Emily.
And I'm Katie.
And this is our podcast where we read you Harry Potter fan fiction.
Yes, we do.
So Tori followed up with us and said that at some point it is in fact discussed that your animagus is just your Patronus.
Yes.
I do not remember that happening, but...
Me either, but, she came right out with it, texting me her commentary, and I love her for it. Thank you, lady.
She was prepared.
She was. It was perfect, and then I just screenshot and sent it right to Emily. I'm like, this is why I love Tori.
Yeah, that's perfect. She's our third Harry Potter person.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, anything you want to talk about before we start reading?
I don't have much of anything.
Me either.
Our lives aren't that exciting, guys.
Yeah, I got a new washing machine this week. I'm very excited.
That's pretty exciting. That's a real grown-up excitement.
All right, let's read chapter 2. Owl Treats and Oversharing.
I love it.
In the morning, Potter made himself toast and gave Draco more beef stew. He looked over at the owl speculatively. "You've healed up pretty nice. Ready to fly home?" He opened a window. Draco eyed it skeptically. He could risk the skies and hope he made it back home from who knows where he was.
You're at Harry Potter's house. You know where you are.
He didn't even have his wand, which seemed rather stupid in hindsight. Or he could stay here, just long enough to get a look at the Daily Prophet and see if he'd been reported missing, and just a little extra time for the soreness. Harry didn't want a new owl. Hedwig hadn't been just a bird who brought him the post. She'd been, well, family. Through the long summers at the Dursleys, she'd kept him sane. Hermione had brought it up once. He hadn't responded well. Anyhow, it wasn't like Harry was big into writing long responses. He'd scrawl a response and send it back immediately. He liked flu calls. Wasn't inconvenient, really.
You like flu call. You basically are like, I don't need no text messages. I like calling people. You are that person, Harry.
God, Harry. He would be, though.
He would be that person. But he is that person. He's like, oh, no, I don't text. Call me. I'll call you. No, just send me an owl. No, I'm going to call you.
No, I'm just going to call you real quick. It's fine. Harry, please don't. But now he had an owl. Not permanently. But it seemed a bit much to force it out before it felt well enough to fly home. I need to go to the shops. Harry wasn't sure if he should talk to the owl as much as he was. Hermione would probably diagnose that as something. Loneliness, maybe. "I'll grab you some frozen mice." Draco hooted sharply. He would not eat frozen mice. I would not either.
You've been feeding him warm beef stew. Why do you think he's going to eat frozen mice now?
Yeah. "I know, it sounds tasty, doesn't it?" Harry mumbled as he pulled on a pair of trainers. Draco was almost distracted by the state of the shoes. There were holes. Harry wasn't just wearing Muggle shoes. He was wearing old Muggle shoes. Thankfully, the prospect of frozen mice brought him back on task. No one but him needed to know he'd been Harry Potter's owl for a few days. But he couldn't live with himself knowing he'd eaten frozen mice. Draco fluttered towards the strange white cabinet Potter had pulled stew out of. That strange white cabinet is a refrigerator.
Come on, Draco. Is Harry living in Muggle London?
It seems like it, yes. It also seems like he needs to buy himself some new shoes.
Also, Harry, you're rich.
Buy new shoes.
I know you, grew up and you're like, I'm poor. You're not poor. You were never poor.
Never poor.
Gringotts will exchange your Gringotts money, wizard money, for Muggle money, I'm sure.
Yes.
They have a conversion station.
I'm 100% sure they do.
Come on.
What, are you hungry already? That's why I'm going to the shops. No food left. Draco stared. Had the idiot really let himself run out of food? Obviously, house elf rights weren't working out too well for him.
He wouldn't have a house elf, Draco.
Yeah, he's friends with Hermione Granger. Do you think she would let that happen?
The only way he'd have a house elf is if Dobby was still alive. Because Dobby would just be like, Harry, I'll be your house elf.
Yes.
And he'll be like, okay, I'll pay you in socks. And Dobby would have been like, sweet.
That's probably exactly how that conversation would have happened. He would have been like, you can take all the socks you want, or I'll buy you all the socks that you could possibly ever need. And Dobby would be like, yes.
Yes.
Buy me all of the socks.
I'm here for socks.
Yep.
That's all I want.
And if you'd rather have stew, you need to hit up Molly Weasley. Those were leftovers from the burrow. Draco gagged. It'd been bad enough thinking that Harry had cooked it. He'd eaten food prepared by a Weasley. He could feel his feathers tinging ginger.
That's not how it works, Draco.
Are you sure? I feel gingery when you cook me food.
That's not how it works. But okay. If any time I make my pasta sauce, that's how you feel, I'm fine with it.
Harry looked at the owl oddly and, assured it was not choking, left. I like how that's what he's worried about. Is it choking? No, okay, I'm going to leave now. Bye.
I'm good.
Potter had left the window open. Draco ignored it and looked around the room. Small, shabby. It was what he expected from Potter, who'd shown up first year in Muggle hand-me-down clothing, but it rather seemed the savior of the wizarding world could do a bit better.
Well, yeah, Harry's rich, but he also was like, I have no money, I don't know how to spend money, so I'm just not gonna.
Unless it was like a full gold object, then he really wanted that.
Right.
Like the full gold cauldron. The sofa was stacked with blankets that screamed Weasley. There were a couple of pictures on the mantle, but other than that, the place didn't look particularly lived in. Not, a small voice whispered in the back of Draco's head, that his newly renovated bedroom did either. Despite the blankets, there was no sign Potter had shacked up with the Weasley girl. A brief worry seized Draco at the thought of a cat like Granger's half-Kneasel monstrosity, but pets also seemed to be absent. In fact, Draco crooked his head. Potter didn't seem to have an owl. Potter had that rather nice snowy owl in school, Draco remembered. Not that he would have noticed it if it had not been so very white and flashy and perched next to Potter's stupid face.
Okay, Draco, we all know you love Harry Potter. Calm down. He had a very beautiful owl.
He can't help it. When Harry returned, he did indeed have frozen mice. He raised an eyebrow at the owl as it turned its back. Really? Then I suppose you don't want an owl tree either. He shook the pack tantalizingly. They were high-end, too. The middle shelf blue pack had been too familiar. The owl did not seem to care. It fluffed its feathers up dramatically, retreated from the bag of treats. Harry popped it open. Look, just owl treats. They're not scary.
Oh, Harry. You sweet, sweet little angel.
Draco was reeling from the fact that Harry Potter thought he was scared rather than disgusted when the black-haired wizard threw one in his own mouth. See? Perfectly safe. Draco stared. The barbarian! On the other hand, owls did seem to like them, and really, who would ever find out?
Nobody, Draco, because you don't have to say anything.
Just pretend you went on a short holiday for a while.
Like, come on.
He leaned forward cautiously. Potter rattled the pack again in what he apparently thought was an appealing manner. Draco snatched one. It was not bad. Not bad at all. Draco leaned in for another, but Potter sealed the pack up. Not quite yet. You need to eat more real food. He looked meaningfully at the dead mice. Draco considered how fast he'd have to move to claw out Potter's stupid green eyeballs. Potter seemed to get the message and backed off, hands in the air. Whoa there, I'm just gonna fix myself some lunch and you can eat whatever you want, he gestured to the open window. Or leave whenever you want. Potter did something that might be called cooking, except it didn't involve a wand, and the only ingredient was chicken.
I would never, ever do any household chores the Muggle way if I was a wizard.
100%. Like, everything would use my wand.
Everything would be magicked. Everything.
Draco flapped over to watch. His left wing was still weak, and he nearly veered into Potter's shoulder. Whoa! Potter shooed him off. The stove's hot.
Well, no shit, Sherlock.
Draco peered down at the pan Potter seemed to think was called a stove. There was indeed steam rising from a piece of chicken. It wasn't exactly impressive, but it did smell rather nice.
So it's just chicken.
It seems to be just chicken.
In a pot or a pan? Pan, okay. So he's just cooking some chicken in a pan.
It's just, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe he seasoned it and Draco didn't notice.
Let's hope. Harry watched the owl. Concern about it getting burnt was fading as he realized it was eyeing his lunch. Really? I do my good deed rescuing a poor, pathetic stray, and I end up with your prissy self? The owl ran its beak along an already gleaming feather. Harry stared and got another piece of chicken from the fridge. Not the first time I've fallen for good looks over personality, though, is it? He muttered as he threw it in the pan.
Who's he referring to?
I think it's Ginny.
I was thinking Cho.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I was thinking Cho. Because Cho really had no personality.
I don't think that's her fault, though. Draco watched Potter cut the chicken with something resembling contentment.
Okay.
Okay, then. He decided to become an animagus mainly because he needed something to do. His house arrest had ended a few months ago, but leaving the manor wasn't exactly pleasant. Draco wasn't sure which was worse, the vicious scowls he received in the street or the self-loathing that came with his inability not to sneer back. There were a lot of reasons Draco wanted to complete the animagus process. Not being himself for a while was one of them. And as Harry sarcastically arranged bits of chicken into a crown and presented it with a flourish, it didn't seem that bad of an idea at all.
That is amazing. So much sass. This is no need to call me sir, professor level sass.
I was wondering why it said sarcastically arranging them. It's because he was arranging them into a crown.
Which is amazing.
Oh, Harry. Harry was still grinning as he ate his own plate of chicken. This owl was ridiculous, but Harry hadn't smiled this much since. The happiness faded and he pushed the plate away. He couldn't really remember. And wasn't that sad? And wasn't it sad that what had triggered this bout of misery was being happy? Harry tugged at his hair and buried his head into the sofa. That he didn't really like, but didn't really hate either, so he hadn't mustered up the energy to do anything about it. He'd been so excited to buy this place. The borough had been too crowded, both with people and their absences. And, well, Grimmauld Place had never been particularly cheery. This tiny house, with its yard big enough for flying, it was a fresh start. It was home. It was his. And he loved it fiercely. But he was still miserable.
Okay, well, that's just sad.
Yes. Potter was slumped on the sofa with his head in his hands. Oh, Salazar, was he crying? This was mortifying. Draco nearly left then and there. He had to deal with the wilds. Better than tears, from Potter no less. But, well, Potter had arranged his chicken into a crown. Draco fluttered over to the back of the sofa. Potter looked up blearily as he felt the weight settle. He smiled weakly. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a mess. Carefully clearing his mind of everything except what a disaster Potter's hair was, Draco leaned over and carefully began grooming it. Potter tried to shake him off, but he also laughed, so Draco stubbornly continued. Finally, Potter leaned back and let him. Thanks, he muttered. I mope a lot nowadays. Draco had wondered what Potter was up to. Besides uncomfortable-looking pictures in the profit from charity balls, the boy who lived had managed to stay surprisingly low profile. I wasn't really supposed to live, you know. Draco struggled to keep separating the strands of hair. He wasn't really cut out to be Harry Potter's avian therapist. On the other hand, he was a tad curious, and Potter's hair was a mess.
Potter's hair is always a mess.
Always. That's like his main feature.
Like, it's literally, that's how he's described.
Yeah. Hadn't really thought past Voldemort dying. Draco shuddered. Still didn't like hearing the name said aloud. Thought I'd be an Auror, maybe, but it was more I'd wish I already was. Seemed better to have an Auror handle everything than a school kid. Now I don't really know what to do. Draco gave a soft hoot in acknowledgement. He didn't know what he wanted to do, to the point where he wasn't even worried about when he'd stop wanting to be an owl.
Okay, well, that's also sad.
Yeah. Like, I worked really hard at Defense Against the Dark Arts. I'm pretty good at it, but I'm also really sick of it. Draco hooted again.
It makes perfect sense.
Yes,
I would
do
also
agree.
be sick of it after 7 years.
He liked potions. He tinkered around a bit. The thought of putting enough effort to make a career out of it right now seemed nothing short of painful. Harry sat still for a few more moments, then plopped the owl onto his shoulder and stood once it stopped fluttering. We're going to go look out in my garden. It doesn't really need water because it's been raining so much, but I might water it anyway. The garden was, in fact, rather flooded. Harry cast a few drying charms, then bent down to weed while the owl stretched its wings. He was still flying a little lopsided, and Harry supposed it meant he'd stay a little longer. It wasn't so bad having something to take care of. It's what he's been trying for with the garden, and, well, it had the advantage of him not really caring if everything died. It also wouldn't groom his hair when he was sad. Actually, Harry thought, if he took Neville up on his offer of helping out, it probably would. Neville and Luna were good for each other, but sometimes hard to decide if they were good for other people.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yep. The owl followed him back inside. I'm not really planning on keeping you long term, you know. I realize your wing is not quite ready yet, but I still wanted to warn you. The owl ignored him. You've probably got a real posh home, spoiled as you are, so I wouldn't expect you'd want to stay. But if you did, it wouldn't work.
Okay.
He was pretty sure he could feel the owl judging him. My last owl was killed. He wasn't sure why he said that. He wasn't normally spilling his guts like this, but the owl had fluffed up in horror as if it understood, and it was comforting because obviously it didn't.
It does, though, because it's Draco.
It's Draco. It knows what you're saying. The curse was meant for me. That actually happened a lot. Someone dying for me. So I should probably be less torn up about an owl, but I'm really, really not. The owl just stared at him, and Harry smiled weakly. Do you want another owl treat? Draco did not want another owl treat, but he did want Potter to stop talking, so he hooted somewhat desperately and swallowed the treat queasily. Again, it tasted good, but it was also exceedingly strange because he could tell it would not taste at all pleasant to a human, except maybe Potter, but Potter was ridiculous and prone to oversharing.
Also, fact.
Yes. Potter sat down on the sofa to read, and lacking anything better to do, Draco perched behind him. Potter was reading something about the Roman Empire. It appeared to be a Muggle account, and while Draco was forced to admit it was a fresh perspective, he would also have to find some way of anonymously gift Potter something by a wizarding author. Muggle gladiators were brutal, but wizards had dragons.
Which is sweet.
Yep. Potter snorted at something. I remember liking this author, but I've read some more recent stuff that doesn't willfully misinterpret any history of homosexuality. There are definitely some gaps. Draco fluffed his feathers in surprise. He would like to read that recent stuff. He didn't know of any wizarding books that dealt with queer history. Not that they were likely to be in the Manor Library if they existed. I rather thought the wizarding world would be more open-minded about that kind of stuff than the Muggle one. I suppose I was just used to being happier in the wizarding world. Never mind the whole Dark Lord trying to kill me thing. Draco thought that was important. Still, better than where I grew up. Draco wasn't sure if he wanted to know where Harry grew up. For a long time, he'd never really thought about Harry as separate from Hogwarts. Anyhow, it's not like the wizarding world's prejudices are worst. There's a lot of other things on my mind. I like girls too. I've only ever actually crushed on one guy, and it wouldn't have worked out for a whole lot of reasons. It didn't even seem worth it to think about. Still doesn't, Potter shuddered. The prophet would probably have a field day. Pointless when I don't even feel like dating.
He's just blathering.
Draco hooted rather pathetically. Potter had just come out to him as bisexual. He wanted to obliviate himself. But he also really wanted to know who Potter had liked.
Yes, because, Draco, you're a gossip.
Also, Draco, it's you.
Obviously.
Yeah,
how do you not get that?
Ginny knows, but I haven't actually told Ron or Hermione. Potter tilted his head. Hermione suspects. Ron probably wouldn't believe it until he sees me snogging a bloke.
Fair.
Draco felt like he was going to die. Potter patted him absent-mindedly. Hermione wants to get me to go to therapy. I can kind of see the appeal, I guess. Talk to a stranger, he shrugged. But she hasn't found anyone willing to swear an unbreakable vow not to go to the prophet, so we'll see. Draco has a therapist. She was rather good, and he had no plans to share her with Potter, but, well, pureblood families knew about discretion. The kind of firms Harry needed were the ones that wouldn't even acknowledge their existence to someone named Granger. Not, Draco supposed, not that Potter would take that the right way if he were to tell him.
It's true.
True. For dinner, they had more chicken.
Sounds like Harry only knows how to cook one thing.
Chicken. Potter arranged Draco's into a neat square and added a squiggle of sriracha.
Oh.
Don't actually eat that, please. He added, a bit panicked. Draco was not stupid. He did not. Potter, however, was clearly unprepared for a pet. Any snarky thoughts about how he'd managed to keep an owl alive through school were quickly vanished by the memory of Potter's haunted look when he said that she'd been killed. After Potter cleaned up, he didn't even use magic.
Why?
Draco was disgusted. Same, Draco, same.
Seriously.
They went outside. Harry pulled out a broom from the shed, and together they circled the yard, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Draco got tired of moping and tried a few dives and loops. He hadn't actually tried any adventurous flying yet. Even with his sore wing, the naturalness which came with the movements were glorious. Draco rather thought he'd be better on a broom after spending some time flying as an owl, but he gave Potter a run for his money. Potter was still grinning when they got inside, but the light left his eyes rather quickly. Panicked, Draco hopped on his shoulder and pulled at his hair. It had worked well enough the first time. Indeed, Potter gave a sort of smile and set him on the sofa. Night owl, he yawned.
Draco, why are you so concerned that the light left his eyes?
I know.
You were all like, ah. And now you're all like, no, don't be sad.
Yeah. Draco's being very weird.
He is.
Draco woke panting. He hadn't realized owls could have nightmares.
You're a human in an owl body.
Yeah. It had been more abstract than normal, but he could still hear the screaming echoing in his head. Actually, there was definite screaming. Draco stiffened, cursing himself for not having his wand. Then he realized it was only Potter also having a nightmare, a very unpleasant one that he did not want to sit here and listen to. Draco flapped towards the door that, by default, if of not being the bathroom, must be Potter's bedroom. Draco hooted sharply and pecked at the door. Potter continued yelling. Draco hooted again until the noise finally stopped. Hedwig? Potter's drowsy voice mumbled, I'm sorry, but the window's barred. You know I'd let you out if I could. Then Potter seemed to come fully awake. Something heavy thunked against the other side of the door. It sounded like Potter had thrown a book. Go away, he yelled. His voice cracked. Draco retreated, pretended he didn't hear Potter crying on the other side of the door.
Oh, sad.
Draco knew there was a time that he could have mocked Potter for crying over an owl, but Draco had bawled for his father, who wasn't even dead, only in prison. He'd cried for his Aunt Bellatrix, and part of that had been plain relief she was gone, but he still cried. When Harry woke up, the owl wasn't in the house. He felt rather guilty for throwing something at it, even if there'd been a door in the way. His temper wasn't something he really liked about himself. He got so defensive. Owl? He called out, feeling a bit silly for not having named it something. Prissy? King? Pretty Feathers? There was no response, which was to be expected. He'd rather tried to scare it off and didn't even want it to stay. Still, after making himself toast, he cut up a piece of chicken and stuck it on a plate on the windowsill. Not that he wanted the bird to come back per se, but if it was still hanging around, it shouldn't go hungry just because he had a nightmare. Its wing was still a little wobbly. Harry drank his tea and nibbled his toast and worried about the owl right up until he looked back at the window and found it eating chicken. All right then, you need a name. A temporary one, mind you, till you go back to your real home. The owl didn't even blink. It just continued eating. How about Dainty? The owl ignored him. Royal? Heartface? The owl glared and Harry winced. I know. That was a rather bad one. Chicken. The owl flapped back outside. Harry followed it and stood calling up names to where the owl sat on the roof. How about Broomstick? The owl blinked and ruffled its feathers, and something that approximately a shrug. Well, we'll go with that then. I can always abbreviate it to BS. Harry ducked, laughing as the owl swooped at him. Hearing Potter address him as broomsticks, as all things, was exceedingly strange. But Draco'd been getting sick of listening to Potter's bad names. At least broomstick was something he liked. Not that chicken wasn't, but obviously there were worse options than a Quidditch reference. After a few hours of flying and lunch, Draco watched Potter watch his sofa. It was a rather dull sofa, comfy enough, but drab and somewhat threadbare. Not really worthy of the amount of Potter was investing looking at it. Finally, Potter raised his wand. Draco watched as Potter transfigured the sofa into something very similar, but much, much more plaid.
Oh.
Potter winced. I was probably thinking a bit too hard of McGonagall's lecture there. He tried again. They both frowned at the leather monstrosity that summed up about how Draco thought the Gryffindor common room probably looked. He was afraid that if he could see the color, it would be red. He hooted indignantly when Potter didn't immediately try again. Yeah, you're probably right, Potter frowned. Next was velvet, which was actually an improvement, so Draco let it slide, but then Potter called the color grape, and Draco doubted that it would do any favors to Potter's lovely, warm brown skin tone. I feel like purple would look very nice.
Also, his lovely, warm brown skin tone.
Yes.
Okay, Draco.
Lovely.
All right.
To go with his stupid green eyes.
Yeah, all right, Draco. You straight up sound like a teenage girl.
A lot of flapping and a few color changes later, Potter eyed his new sky blue velvet couch with satisfaction. He side-eyed Draco as if expecting more disapproval, but Draco shrugged. In grayscale, at least it looked good with Weasley blankets, which was something of a feat. It wasn't elegant. The couch was far too large and squishy, but it was bright and homey. After lunch, more chicken, but at least Potter had opened a can of green beans. Draco knew more cooking spells, which was saying something. Draco casually clawed up Potter's curtains. They were dark and the pattern was awful. They were cherubs.
Ugh.
Potter started to get mad, probably fearful for his new sofa, but then he looked closer at the curtains. I don't actually know if that's a rabbit or a deer. Draco wasn't sure what color Potter finally went with for the curtains, but it was light and airy material, so he hooted in approval. Potter laughed. I literally found the prissiest owl in existence, and now I'm letting it redecorate, he laughed again. Do you know how insane that is, Broomstick? Draco stuck up his nose and didn't reply. He worried he'd gone a little too far with not acting particularly owl-like, but Potter seemed oblivious as ever.
He's as observant as a brick wall.
It's true. In fact, Potter was already looking around for something new to work on. His eyes got soft when they landed on the pictures on the mantel. I've been meaning to get some proper frames for these. Draco found that he didn't need to move. If he focused his eyes, he could see the people in the photos all the way from the kitchen counter. One was of Potter with Granger and Weasley, which was to be expected. Another was of Potter's father at Hogwarts with Sirius Black, and what he was pretty sure was a younger Professor Lupin and Peter Pettigrew. It was an odd photo. Draco had heard that Black hadn't actually killed Potter's parents, but wasn't that because Pettigrew had? But Potter didn't monologue, and Draco couldn't ask, so he was left to wonder. The last photo was of a toddler. Draco had no clue where he came from, and his mind was already jumping to a secret love child when Potter sighed. I really should spend more time with Teddy. Draco gulped. Was Teddy Potter's son? Andromeda shouldn't have to raise him all by herself. Draco froze. His family was pretty great at ensuring you didn't accidentally hear anyone's name on the street. Why in the world would his aunt be raising Potter's love child? He hooted in what was hopefully a quizzical manner. It's all I can see is Tonks and Lupin. I just get so mad at Lupin for leaving them, and now here I am. I go over once a week, but it hurts to look at him. The Git deserves someone who wants to be there, and I'm just making Andromeda sad. Draco scanned desperately through the names. Andromeda, Tonks, Lupin. Tonks and Lupin had had a baby? He wondered if his mother knew. Probably not. She might like to, but he rather doubted that Andromeda wanted to see her sister, even if it wasn't the one who killed her daughter. Draco was stunned by the knowledge that he had a new family member that he barely registered when Potter went out. The end.
Draco doesn't seem to be trying very hard to get better.
No, he does not.
No.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us on our journey through the trap door.
Please leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes. It would literally mean the world to us.
It really would.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Through the Trapdoor 16 or on Twitter at The Trapdoor.
And please send us an email at throughthetrapdoor16@gmail.com with any story suggestions. And as always, join us again next Saturday as we travel through the trapdoor.